Now, after 20 years, the son of Frankenstein returns, and fear grips the village anew. A man tainted by the blood of his father can forget his human soul and carry on the diabolical work of the Frankensteins.
As a man, I should destroy him. But as a scientist, I should do everything in my power to bring him back to conscious life. Benson, turn on the generator.
And we are back. Welcome back, folks, to Podcast Part 3, the Part 3 podcast. I am Sam, and he is Will.
I am Will.
He's Will. I should not completely emasculate you and let you introduce yourself. I am sorry.
Go right over my intro, Sam. Thanks.
I had momentum, man. It's my week.
It's true, it is.
I'm sorry you had to see that, folks. So it was my pick this week, and I decided to throw things back about almost a century at this point and talk about one of the Part 3s in what you could call the first shared universe of movies, Universal Classic Horror's Son of Frankenstein from way back in 1939.
Yeah, way back. And is this
back.
like the first one of the first Part 3s, like cinematic Part 3s?
I think that wasn't like someone doing like a bunch of Sherlock Holmeses or like a bunch of like adventure serials or things like that.
Well,
but even then, 1939 is early in the game. Like,
yeah,
it is as far away now from 1939 as 1939 was from like before the Civil War, I think.
Oh my god.
just to put it in perspective here. So yeah, this is an oddball of a movie because like anything, especially genre stuff like horror or sci-fi from before, say, like 1977, give or take, you have to kind of rewire your brain to watch it. So it's like this isn't like a good or a bad movie by modern standards.
Yeah,
it's like anything black and white, anything that's from like that era of writing and acting and filmmaking where they'd only had sound for about 12 years at this point, and when sound came in they had to completely rethink how they shot movies. I refer to the definitive work on the subject, Singing in the Rain.
Well, obviously, of course.
On the transition from silent to talkies. Yeah, I guess a lot. You know, everyone knows the Universal monsters, like, as icons. They are, like, is there anything more easily recognizable than the monster, the Frankenstein monster's big square head and green bolt neck and all that?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things, like, it's hard to think of now, but it's almost, like, instantly iconic. And it's one of those looks and designs that we as a modern audience can't even think what it was like to see that the first time, because it is so embedded in our pop culture. Like, it's so crazy.
And these movies, you know, elements of them, and elements of them have been passed on into other Frankenstein or Dracula or the Wolfman, have been passed on into other versions of them, and they become this like mishmash, almost like the movies themselves are an urban legend that get told and retold. Like, there's elements of Son of Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein and the original Frankenstein that just sort of exist in lore, and they get cut up and split back together, and it's
well, like Igor. I mean, like, my understanding is he's not really in the other two Frankenstein movies, right? And
no, there's but he's also, if you've seen this movie, Igor is not a hunchback. Hunchback, there's a hunchback in the first Frankenstein named Fritz, and he's like a legitimate like hunchback, like Notre Dame style Quasimodo hunchback, and then he gets the name Igor later on. Igor in this, he's got like he has like one shoulder up because his neck had been broken. And like there's other things that like just elements of the Frankenstein monster that have like that aren't in this. Like, everyone portrays the Frankenstein monster. When you do him with your hands out forward, right?
Yeah.
And that didn't happen until the 5th movie in the series, and there is a behind-the-scenes reason for it. And we can kind of get into that when I go down the crazy-ass continuity of these Frankenstein movies. Because there are 7 Universal horror movies that feature the Frankenstein monster. This is the 3rd one. This is the last one with Boris Karloff in it. But there ultimately were 7. And the last 3 or so are kind of they're the Avengers movies, where the whole gang shows up.
One of those obviously being Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, right?
Oh, I'm wrong then. There's 4, actually.
Oh!
Yeah, I forgot all about the Abbott and Costello verse. Yeah, so just to go back to the beginning, Son of Frankenstein came out in 1939. This was about 8 years into the Universal post-silent era horror boom. Universal Studios in 1931 was run by Carl Laemmle Sr. and his son, Carl Laemmle Jr., who was probably 26 at the time. Carl Laemmle Sr. had a tremendous amount of success with horror in the silent era with Lon Chaney Sr. He'd done Hunchback of Notre Dame. He'd done The Man Who Laughs with Conrad Veidt, and Man Who Laughs famously inspired the design of the Joker in Batman. And he had done, probably most iconically, the 1925 Phantom of the Opera, which is, isn't usually, it doesn't make it into these box sets with the later ones, but is considered an iconic, monster design, and it's a very famous performance from Lon Chaney Sr., one of the most famous, certainly American silent horror movies. It doesn't quite have the panache of like the German expressionist stuff, but it's everyone knows that face. If you when you think of the Phantom of the Opera, you either think of sexy Michael Crawford on Broadway, or you think of horrible Skull Man from the silent era. That's pretty much, those are the two.
Yeah.
And so, late 1920s, silent movies are on their way out. Talking pictures are on their way in. And the Hays Code is about to kick in and really clamp down on what you can put in movies. But Carl Laemmle Jr., the young one, knows that horror is something that you can sell. And it'll sell to a theater crowd, and it'll sell to an audience. And it's a big swing in 1931 to do this. And in 1931, the first movie they make is Dracula with Bela Lugosi. As iconic as the original Frankenstein.
As you can get, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's very stagey by modern standards. It was based off a play, not the book so much. But, has Bela Lugosi as Dracula, which is, again... in terms of a performance, there's nothing you can say about it. It just is. It's like the most iconic thing in anything ever.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's what you get to this point where it's like, how do you even discuss it in critical terms? Because it is so like deeply embedded in our culture now that you just... Like, what do you say about it? I don't know. He's Dracula. When you think of Dracula, you think of Bela Lugosi. That's the one you think of.
I would equate criticizing these movies on a certain level, certainly the first few. It would be like going to a cave and criticizing different cave paintings. It's like, oh no, you can't. They're not art. They're not even like films. They're foundational pieces of communication that are baked into the history of this medium and our culture at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and it's almost like, and I guess I should preface this: the Universal monsters are like a huge. I saw those movies when I was a kid. I haven't really revisited them since, so I don't. They're really fuzzy for me.
Yeah,
but
and on the flip side, I will say that I have a tremendous affection for them, and there's several that I rewatch on a regular basis out of like just sheer love of them, and I find them fascinating as like these weird artifacts. But, I unironically love them the way I love the Friday the 13th movies.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like a lot of it is you're kind of watching genre film in particular get, like, codified and figure out, like, how, like, the grammar of this kind of stuff is being put together. And, you're watching proto science fiction movies and you're like with Frankenstein story very much feels like the prototype for RoboCop in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And you're seeing like bits and pieces of it, as it sort of filters down through, adaptations, remakes, parodies, etc., etc.
You can tie it, to RoboCop. It's the Golem. It's the story of the Golem. The original book by Mary Shelley is iconic and incredibly influential, but for completely different reasons. There's very little to connect that the two have in common besides a few character names, and they don't even get those 100% right. Like,
yeah, that's true.
Like in the original Dracula, for whatever reason, they switch the character names of Mina and Lucy from the book, and then they do the same thing in the 1931 Frankenstein, where he becomes Henry Frankenstein and his buddy is Victor, and in the book it's Victor Frankenstein and his buddy is Henry. Yeah, and it's almost like you're gonna see. I'll talk about it when we talk about like sort of the lead up to this, because I did a little reading on it. It's every time they made a sequel to one of these, the original writer tries to like actively connect it to the prior movie, and then that all gets cut. So there's like, and at first that's laughable, but it occurred to me that kind of makes sense, because this movie is 1939, it had been 4 years since Bride of Frankenstein, and there's no way
you would have been able to see it. Yeah.
People wouldn't remember.
You can't get caught up.
Yeah, you gotta move forward, new shit, all you have that is your connective tissue is that monster, that
right.
Boris Karloff, really, like, because Boris Karloff and to a lesser extent Bela Lugosi, and then later Lon Chaney Jr. were like the rock stars of this. Karloff was credited as Karloff the Uncanny, and he was just like, he was in all this shit, and he's a good actor too.
Yeah,
like that's the thing. I think he gets sold a little short in Son of Frankenstein compared to Bride, where the character
there's
gets
just not a lot of him here.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so Dracula and Frankenstein are in 1931, and they're both tremendous successes. I think they get re-released a few times through the 30s, but then it's off to the races. And then 1932, you have The Mummy, which is basically kind of the same plot as Dracula, but with a better director, and he's a mummy. But like, and if you're going into that expecting anything like the Brendan Fraser Mummy, you're gonna be
very disappointed.
But it's better made than Dracula. It's the guy who directed it is the cinematographer that worked with Todd Browning on Dracula, and it's like he kind of took all the stuff from Dracula and like it was like a chance to kind of hone it and do it again a second time around.
Right. Yeah.
And then 1935 is Bride of Frankenstein, which is one of the weirdest movies ever made. And that's James Whale allowed to do whatever he wants. And it's this weird homoerotic Christian allegory. It's has a lot of like the most iconic Frankenstein stuff in it. The bride's design is super famous, and she's literally in the last 2 minutes of the movie.
It's been so long. Oh my God,
she's like, it's just the last scene. You spend a lot of time in that movie with just the monster, and it's he goes to the hut and he meets the blind man,
right?
And he learns to speak. Bride of Frankenstein is where you get like good friend, big friend, big success. But at about that time, the horror movies were doing well, but the Laemmles put a lot of money into projects that were kind of bombs. And so in 1936, they were forced out of Universal in a hostile takeover. Ooh. And that kind of changes the trajectory of horror for Universal. And by the early 40s, they were in full-on crank-em-out mode. But before they did that, they made Dracula's Daughter in 1936, which is the sequel to Dracula. Doesn't feature Bela Lugosi, but has as much lesbian subtext as Bride of Frankenstein has homoerotic subtext. And then in 1939, they make Son of Frankenstein, which I can only describe as it feels like they're trying to do a soft reboot of the Frankenstein series after just 2 movies. And a big part of that is also James Whale was no longer involved. And Colin Clive, the actor who played Victor Frankenstein Henry Frankenstein in the first 2, had passed away. He was an alcoholic. He had some mental health issues. He died very young. Really strong performance in those first 2 movies. But Son of Frankenstein, they bring out the big guns. It's the three Bs. They got Basil Rathbone, they got Bela Lugosi, and they got Boris Karloff. And the gang's all here.
And they are going to devour the scenery.
They really
devour.
are.
They really they're like, we are going to take big old bites out of these sets. And they are amazing sets.
This is I wanted to talk about this movie in particular because it's such an oddity compared to almost every movie around it, except for maybe like those first 5. Like you've got sort of that, like if I go pull out the box set off my shelf, you got Dracula, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Wolf Man, The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and they usually try to wedge the Claude Rains Phantom of the Opera that no one actually likes on there as well. But Wolfman and Creature from the Black Lagoon is way later. It's 1954.
Yeah.
Wolfman is 1941. He comes in a little later, but I'd say apart from those first few that have sort of a real style and are very iconic, Son of Frankenstein, it's such an oddity because it's not only really well shot, beautifully designed, but it is easily 25 to 30 minutes longer than every other Universal monster movie. For better or worse, I will say. But like some of these movies, most of them do not clear 75 minutes.
Right.
And this one is an hour and 40.
Yeah, it is strange that this one's so long, because like the shorter run times, I would imagine part of that was just because of money and film stock, right? I mean, like they couldn't just continuously run 4-hour movies or what, I don't know.
Yeah, this one had a pretty big budget compared to the others. I think the budget was like $300,000 to $400,000.
Okay, yeah.
Which was not nothing in 1939.
Yeah.
So basically, Son of Frankenstein, at the end of The Bride of Frankenstein, Heinrich in this one. It's Heinrich.
That's right, yeah.
He gets his... Heinrich, Dr. Frankenstein and his sort of very mincing, sort of weird old queen of a college professor make Dr. Pretorius make the bride to appease his original creation and give him a friend. The bride rejects the creature, and the creature blows up the lab and kills himself, the bride, and Dr. Pretorius. Frankenstein himself and his bride Elizabeth survive, and now we jump ahead some 20, 30 years, and his son, Wolf von Frankenstein, has returned to their old European village of Franken. It's now called Frankenstein.
Right, the whole village is Frankenstein now, yeah.
Yeah. And they to reclaim the like family estate and all of his and like the title and all that. And when they get there, him and his wife and his little son Peter, that town is not happy to see him.
Nope. What did they when the moment they show up, they're like, "We're here to meet you, not to greet you."
Yeah, all these old fucking burgomasters. Oh, I love Universal Monster Town, where it's sort of set in this like timeless world where people are wearing lederhosen or like 1930s suits, just depending on the scene. Sometimes it's interchangeable. The mob can either be all in suits and fedoras, or they're all in like old Bavarian leotards. I love it. It's so iconic, and this one it's the design of the Frankenstein like castle and manor.
Oh my god, it's so cool. Like half of my notes are these sets! !
Yeah. They get there and it's not an inviting place, but it's just gorgeous. Their use of shadows, those staircases,
and
it's very
sorry, Sam, go ahead.
No. Are you talking about the dining room?
Yes, I was going to talk about the dining
gargoyles.
room.
These two like boar-shaped gargoyles that are like right over the dinner table. And there's a big like fireplace. Their use of like rain on the windows.
Oh yeah.
It's like lighting from fireplaces, shooting from within the fireplace. Yeah. At one point.
Yeah. And the look of the lab too is so like crazy and strange and surreal.
Yeah,
and
it's not, and like it's supposed to be the lab from the first two movies,
right?
Yet the lab from the first two movies was not in his backyard. It was like way far away at an old tower, and he kept disappearing off to there in the first movie, and it had like the tall tower that you could go up to the top of and lightning would strike. This one, it's like this weird IMAX theater dome,
like mixed with a sulfur mine.
Yeah, like an old sulfur mine, an old Roman bath that had gotten too hot. And then there's like tunnels and the crypt, and it's like the castle has like secret passageways, and it's got a lot of like German expressionist vibes to it. Like the staircases all made me think of like Dr. Caligari.
Oh yeah,
and those like sort of like a lot of angles, a lot of shadows. Like the director is Roland Lee, and he's like one of those early 20th century working directors who's got about 650,000 credits to his name.
Sure, yeah.
And this is probably his most famous movie. I think he did the Don Amici Three Musketeers as well.
Okay.
Yeah, he really knew how to shoot this thing.
Yeah, I mean,
he took a big swing and it works.
Yeah, I mean, and like we were kind of saying, it's the genre is sort of getting codified. The rules are getting hammered down, how these things are supposed to work and how these things are supposed to play. So it's like, it's a time kind of where there's a lot more willingness to do invention and with the camera and where to point the camera and how to play with things and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's getting better at letting kind of character stuff get into the story. Like, it's still got one of those this happens and then this happens and then this happens plots, right. But there's this kind of fun like cat and mouse. It's all very rough around the edges, but there's this great like cat and mouse thing going on in the movie between Frankenstein and Igor and Inspector Krogh.
Yes.
Who when I told you last week that this inspired Young Frankenstein, did you know that there was a real movie with a guy with a fake arm that would go up and down, and he'd stick his like cigarette lighter in it?
Every time that character showed up on screen, I could not stop laughing. And this is one of those things. It's like when people our age encountering Casablanca for the first time and knowing like all the references from Looney Tunes. Yeah, it's like watching Enter the Dragon after you've seen Kentucky Fried Movie. It's like if you know the parody, and the parody is really good, it's like...
Yeah, you don't even need to know the reference to enjoy the parody.
No, but then when you come to the original thing, you sort of... A lot of the impact of the original thing is lost just because of where we're coming at it in time.
It's so fascinating because the actor Lionel Atwill gives a really good performance.
He does.
And his whole monologue where he talks about losing his arm. Like Frankenstein, when Wolf Frankenstein, Basil Rathbone gets to the village, he's very much like, I don't believe a lot of the stuff they say about my father. It's fake news. Right. I don't think it was all that. I think it was all a little blown out of proportion. Did you know they even call the monster Frankenstein sometimes? Which I loved. I was like,
that was such a great joke. Yeah.
That was like, this movie was meta in 1939. But then he meets this inspector who's like this inspector in this small, shitty European village full of, the same Universal Day players. They're in every one of these movies. All the burgers, all the guys in that little city council, they're in every one of these movies. I swear to God. The one who gets choked out on the cart.
Yeah.
In every fucking one of these movies, I swear to you. He will be in the next Frankenstein and the Frankenstein after that as some sort of townsperson. So he meets this inspector, and the inspector's like, I'm here to protect you, Dr. Frankenstein, from these villagers. I stand at your need. And he's like, I don't see what there is to fear. How much harm could the monster have really done? And then he's like, yeah, he ripped my arm out at the socket when I was a little kid. And he has that line. It's like, in another life, I'd be a general. Now, instead, I'm a gendarme guarding 3 deputies in a town. And it's like this honest, genuine moment. And it kind of like, Basil Rathbone's performance in this is the 100-minute version of Joe Bluth going, I've made a huge mistake. And it's just like he can talk himself into making another stupid move every 5 minutes.
Oh my God!
But at some point, at some point he realizes, I think around the time when he figures out how buddy the monster and Igor are, that he's like, oh, I fucked up. I made a huge mistake.
That was something I really liked, is Igor and the monster's relationship, and I liked Igor using the monster as like his murder instrument. Like, I thought that was really clever, flipping the formula a little bit as to how to use the monster and how.
Yeah. He gets a little sidelined. He's very sympathetic in the first two movies, and the monster in this one, it's kind of a sign of what's to come with how they treat the monster in later movies. He's still got Boris Karloff performing him, and he has that pathos to him, like the scene where he sees himself in the mirror, and then he turns to Basil Rathbone and is just kind of like, why do I look like this? Why? He's just like, but Bela Lugosi is so good in this movie.
Oh my God, he's having the time of his life.
Yeah, he's having the time of his life, but I think that's an acting choice too. Like, that character knows he is playing everybody, and he loves it. Yeah. He's having so much fun. Like, I am gonna get all these fuckers. This weird guy, he carries around his little vuvuzela horn that he's always playing.
Yes.
And he's just like spitting on guys, like, you spit on me, I am sorry. Bone gets stuck in my throat when you hang me.
Why would I kill him dead? That's,
This is the place of the dead. We're all dead here. What's amazing is if you told someone that is the same guy that played Count Dracula, they look like, because, Bela Lugosi in Count Dracula is the epitome of, like, old world aristocratic count.
Right, yeah. He reminds me a lot of, in this, his character in Island of Lost Souls, the Dr. Moreau
very similar
adaptation. Yeah.
And Island of Lost Souls was a year after Dracula, too. Right. I think he very famously, did you know I turned down Frankenstein? I didn't think the part was sexy enough. He had these performances in him, but he had substance abuse problems his entire life as a result of injuries from World War I. He, I think he's very stubbornly refused to learn, like, fluent English for a long time, so he learned all his lines for Dracula phonetically, which is where you get the weird, I will be leaving tomorrow evening.
Yeah.
Wow. My blood now flows through her veins. Like that sort of thing. I think he had limitations, but he obviously had, everyone knows sort of the rise of Boris Karloff and the fall of Bela Lugosi, but he had these performances in him, and he had that comedic streak to him. Yeah. And I think, like, if you ever say, oh, Bela Lugosi never gave any good performances besides Dracula, show them this. He's really good in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And and his, and the way he plays it with the monster, there is, like, affection for the monster on his end too. It's interesting the way that dynamic is played out. And I almost wish the whole movie was kind of that. It was like those two, or exploring those two.
Well, it's also, he gets shot and he's kind of out of the movie at that point. And you kind of wish that that relationship developed a little more, to also for the monster to realize that Igor's using him. Everyone's using him. The only one that's not using him is the little kid who's just nice to him. So obviously he's got to run off and nearly throw that kid in some boiling sulfur.
Oh my God, that kid cracked me up. He was just like so just nonchalant and chill and had a very strange accent.
Donnie Donegan. He's I think he's still alive.
Oh, wow.
And apart from this, he was the voice of Bambi.
Oh, really? Wow.
Mother! You can hear it.
Yeah,
well,
no, you
can.
Hello. Oh my gosh. Wow.
But when Basil Rathbone hears him talk about, like, oh, this giant was nice. He walked like this, and he's like, oh shit.
No, what have I done? Oh no. Yeah. Oh man, Rathbone.
Well, it's a great performance from Rathbone. I think we're about to say the same thing. Is like how great he is, because Basil Rathbone's known for either playing Sherlock Holmes or like a wide array of medieval like mustache twirling villains, like in Robin Hood. Yeah. He's so great in this because he starts out, he's such a schmuck. He is a classic universal horror schmuck. Like he's so naive at first. Nothing in nature is terrifying when one understands it.
Right.
It's it's like he can't help, and we must endeavor for science,
Right.
It's like there's that whole montage where he's just like examining the monster with old time, and then which goes from like real x-rays to a lot of like Tesla coils and lightning and stuff.
Yep, as it should.
And he gets so belligerent anytime anyone's onto him.
Yeah. But, one thing that sort of, I can see why Mel Brooks used this movie sort of as the template for Young Frankenstein, because, like, it's so, the emotions and everything are so overheated that all you really need to do is just give it, like, one little nudge over and it's funny.
Totally, yeah. It very much feels like one of those, like, parlor mysteries a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the audience is in on it. You know what's going on, but you're kind of like, if you tweaked it one way, like Krog would be your point of view character.
Yeah.
Young Frankenstein, you tweak it to it's another way, and it's this guy who's just like, just desperately trying to avoid his father's destiny.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You've inherited the Frankenstein name. I hope you do not inherit their fate.
Yeah. I liked that line too. Have that, and then I have Rathbone yells "Quiet, you fool!" at one point, and
"Quiet, you fool!"
He does say "It's alive" too. He said the line.
Yep, he says it's alive, which is like, I feel like for these movies is the you find a way to work it in the way you work in I'll Be Back in the Terminator movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in Bride, it's of course she's alive.
I scare him to death. I don't have to kill him to death.
Perhaps I whipped one up, as a housewife whips up an omelet.
Oh my god. So many good quotes.
Yeah, it's a very quotable movie. It's, it drags there in the last act, as it kind of, like, after poor Benson the butler dies, it kind of is just like waiting for everyone to figure it out one by one, while the mob kind of gets blue balls down at the front gate, really wanting to go up there. The mob doesn't get to burn anything down in this movie.
No, I was disappointed. I wanted a mob rampage, and I did not get one.
No, you get a mob rampage. I think at the end of all of the subsequent Frankenstein movies have a mob rampage. But instead, it ends with Basil Rathbone kicking the monster into the sulfur, and then very wisely just jump cut to them.
We're going away. We're going. We're leaving.
Fucking off out of town. Goodbye. You guys can have the castle. Do what you want with it. We're out.
Not dealing with this anymore. Bye.
Nope. Yeah. But it is, like, it's so interesting. It's like the things that were cut from the original script were all like things tying into the second movie, like the monster talked originally, and
right.
Like they found the skeleton of Dr. Pretorius from the second movie. This, for better or worse, this becomes more of a standalone thing with only like tangential tissue to the original or to the second movie.
I mean, only the amount that you really just need to know. I mean, it's sort of like, well, he's the son of Frankenstein and he's inherited the castle, and you're off to the races. And I mean, I have to imagine, like we were saying earlier, that the function of a lot of this is just because the infrastructure to rewatching movies was just almost impossible in the 30s. Not that they didn't do, like, they didn't re-release movies all the time, but it's not like now when you can be like, well, the latest Marvel movies come out, I gotta watch, Black Panther to know what's happening, and I can just pull that up anytime I want.
Yeah, and I think in hindsight that actually benefited these movies when they got rediscovered on TV in the 60s and on home video in the 80s and 90s. Because, yeah, you could watch Son of Frankenstein without having seen the first two. It works on its own, more or less.
Yeah, there's nothing that you need to know going in that you... I mean, all you really need to know is the basics of Frankenstein.
Yeah, the absolute... bare bones baked into the culture, Frankenstein stuff, which everyone knows. Yeah. You know that from, you could go to the Beetlejuice Rockin' Review at Universal and know everything you need to know to see this movie.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a document of its time, but it was very entertaining, and part of it, I think, it really is, like, as we were saying, the actors. Everyone's just bringing their A game, and
it's great genre acting of the 1930s.
Yes,
which
exactly.
Doesn't bear any real resemblance to acting in modern movies, but is like, when you watch anything made before, like, 1960, you kind of have to look at it with a different lens.
Yeah.
Because acting styles and filmmaking styles were so different. And there's some amazing, whatever, what am I saying? Yeah, there's some great movies made before 1950. Casablanca's really good.
What? Sam, what a hot take. Oh, my God. Oh, oof. Scorched that one.
I have to not get into film student mode where I act like I'm the first person to ever have had these ideas.
Yeah, that's one of those things where it's like, man, obviously they couldn't see movies all the time. Well, duh, you dummy. Of course they could. Yeah, well.
But except they could. They just had to see new movies all the time.
Right.
That's why from 1940 to 1944 there are at least 20 Universal monster movies, and half of them are just Mummy sequels that aren't even sequels to The Mummy. They rebooted The Mummy as The Mummy's Hand in 1940, and then proceeded to make a series of Mummy sequels that I've seen. They all have Lon Chaney Jr. as not Imhotep but Karis.
Oh, okay.
And the second one is probably 60 minutes long, and the first 25 minutes of it are just the guy from the first movie in old age makeup talking about what happened and showing flashbacks of the prior film.
God, that's like a lot of the Godzilla sequels, like Godzilla versus Gigan and Godzilla versus Megalon, where it's like they didn't have a ton of money, so they just reused stock footage from the other movies.
Oh, sure, yeah. I think the Hammer movies did that after a while too. But that's another thing. When you think of The Mummy, you think of old guy wrapped up in bandages, kind of walking all hunched. That's Karis, not Imhotep. Imhotep only looks like a mummy in one scene, and you only really ever see him moving with his hand coming in from off screen. The rest of the time, he's Boris Karloff in like a fez and like an outfit, and he's got like a very wrinkly face, but he looks like a normal person.
Dude. Huh.
But yeah, that's the thing. These movies all become like, I think there are individual ones in this what is essentially a shared universe of movies that extends over, give or take, 18 or 19 years, that definitely deserve merit. Dracula is like an essential watch. Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, and Son of Frankenstein are all really good. Like, they should all be seen. Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein are just so weird. Like, Bride of Frankenstein is absolutely nuts. It is the nuttiest movie I've ever seen. It's got, like, Dr. Pretorius has created little tiny people that he keeps in bottles, and he dressed one like a king and one like a queen, and the king keeps climbing out of his bottle to get into the queen's bottle to do what they do,
How do I not remember? Maybe I've never seen this movie. I think that would be stuck in my brain.
Oh, no, that's the thing. You don't have to have seen these movies to know these movies.
Right.
The imagery of them, like I said, the bride, on every poster, on every VHS tape, on every Blu-ray, she's in 2 minutes of the movie. We all know Frankenstein as walking with his hands out in front of him.
Right.
You want me to tell you why we know that?
Yes.
So the sequel to Son of Frankenstein is called The Ghost of Frankenstein. It doesn't have Boris Karloff. Lon Chaney Jr. plays the monster, but Bela Lugosi comes back as Igor.
Oh.
In that one, they escape the townsfolk, having been given the castle by Basil Rathbone at the end, have a meeting at the beginning. They're like, let's blow it up. So Igor, who has survived, and the monster escape before it gets blown up, and they flee to a neighboring village where another son of Frankenstein has been living under an assumed name, and he wants Igor wants this Dr. Frankenstein to put his brain in the monster's body, so that the monster can be at peace and he can have a strong body. It's got one good line that I always like, which is, "I know who you are, but I also know who your relatives were." Which is a pretty good line. It's still got Bela swinging for the fences, but at the end of the movie, Frankenstein's assistant betrays him and does the procedure. The assistant is played by Lionel Atwill, who played Inspector Krogh in this. Lionel Atwill is in all of these movies as well. Often as as some sort of gendarme. Right. He was in a ton of them until he was accused of perjury in a scandal where he may have been holding an orgy at his house.
What?
And then his career kind of ended. He only did bit parts after that, and he died in 1946. Wow. But another he's in all. I think he's in everything from Son of Frankenstein onward. He's in all of these movies.
Okay.
But Igor's brain goes into the monster's body, and unfortunately, he's been tricked. The blood types don't match, and he can't see, and he freaks out, and he starts staggering around the lab, and it explodes in a chemical fire, and he dies as it sinks into the ground. So, keep in mind, remember, he's blind.
Right, okay.
Jump to Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman in 1943. Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman is looking for Dr. Frankenstein because he may know this guy's the only one. The gypsy woman from the Wolfman says there's only one doctor I know that might know how to cure you, or at the very least know how to let you die. So he goes to Castle Frankenstein. Frankenstein's dead, obviously, but he finds the monster frozen in ice. Now, originally, Bela Lugosi, who now is playing the monster in this one, so the monster's now much shorter, was going to have dialogue, and the fact that he was blind was going to be a plot point. They ended up cutting any scenes, any of his dialogue, and any reference to the Igor stuff from the prior movies. But there are shots where you can see his mouth moving, but they've cut out the dialogue. But that's why Frankenstein moves with his hands out in front of him. Because he can't see. In that one, he's pointing, and he's constantly, you can see Lon Chaney, you can see the Wolfman guiding him in certain shots because he's supposed to be blind. That's why Frankenstein's monster famously walks with his hands out, and they did that in every movie after, just because now that's what he did.
That's the thing. Oh my God.
That's the thing. It's a deleted plot point left over from a prior movie. Another one of those attempts at continuity that they decided, nah.
Wow.
Do we want to reshoot? Nah.
That's insane.
Yeah.
That's insane. And then just as it gets filtered again through parody, adaptation, reimagining, it's just that's how the monster moves. That's how
by Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein 5 years later, he's walking with his hands out.
Yeah.
Yeah. As opposed to you watch all the Boris Karloff ones, he always has his hands at his sides with his hands completely flat.
Right.
And his fingers pointed down. That was kind of how he walked.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, that doesn't have anything to do with Son of Frankenstein, but I just find that shit so interesting. This first attempt at a shared universe and serialized movie making, and just how it has endured almost independent of the movies themselves over the years. It's probably the first example of iconic stuff that's so iconic that you don't need to have seen it to know more than half of the shit in it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just so crazy to think about a lot of that and it's really hard as a modern audience member coming at it when you have sort of your Son of Frankensteins and a zillion Looney Tunes that make fun of the Universal monsters and coming at these with decades of that stuff on top of it. It makes for an interesting watch for sure.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I just think it's real cool. And then like, and they made like, in addition to like the monsters, they had all their like sort of like, they had the Black Cat and the Raven and movies like that have like a Edgar Allan Poe title but have nothing to do with Edgar Allan Poe.
Right.
And like the other monsters, like there were 4 Invisible Man movies, and there were. The Wolfman kind of just merged with Frankenstein after a while. So after Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, which is the second Wolfman movie, there was a prior attempt at a werewolf movie called Werewolf of London in 1935. But that's an interesting movie because the Wolfman the movie kind of established all the rules for werewolves. Like full moon and wolf's bane and the pentagram thing. Werewolf of London, it's like there's a flower that grows in Asia that'll turn you into a werewolf, and this scientist goes and gets them, and he comes back to London, and the wolf makeup is much different. It just kind of makes him look like he's got like Wolverine's hairdo and a lot of eyeliner. So that didn't work out. So they did the Wolfman in 1941. Frankenstein meets the Wolfman in 1943, and then that's when they stopped casting real actors as the monster, because the last 2 together were House of Frankenstein in 1944 and House of Dracula in 1945. And those are both the posters for them crack me up because they like highlight all the shit that's in them. So it's Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Hunchback, Mad Doctor, Mob. And it's like, we got it all, gang.
This is what you're gonna see. This is what you're paying to see.
And both of those, the monster was played by Glenn Strange, who was just a big, like, he was like a Western actor.
Right.
Like, he's, I think, bit parts in some of these older ones. Like, he's always like a guard or a bouncer. But he literally, it's like clockwork in both the movies. The mad scientist finds the monster at like the end of Act 1, and then it's just kind of sitting in the back of the lab. And he's like, I will find a way to give it power. And then, like, as shit hits the fan at the end of Act 3, the monster gets up just in time to kind of, like, stumble around the lab and start a fire. And then they just reuse footage from Ghost of Frankenstein to show him burning to the ground.
Of course.
And Dracula's in both of those, and he's John Carradine.
Oh.
Yeah,
Nice.
different Dracula.
Was that the same Frankenstein who was in... Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's Glenn Strange as well.
Yeah.
That one feels like the comedic... House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula are basically Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, but without Abbott and Costello.
Right.
And Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein has Bela Lugosi in it, too, as Dracula. The only other time he played Dracula.
Wow. I mean, I would be remiss. That's my father's favorite movie is Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, so I have to bring it up when we're talking about the Universal monsters.
No, so. I mean it was one of the... Apparently Abbott and Costello did not like the script and didn't enjoy making it, but they used to... They ended up being, I think, their most successful film.
Yeah.
And was kind of the end of the horror era for Universal, because right after that, there's a pivot to the next big successful... The last monster to enter the pantheon was Creature from the Black Lagoon, right. And that signals the shift to sci-fi in the 50s.
Right.
You go from monsters to creatures and mad scientists and giant insects.
Yeah, the atomic age, really.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, but what's great about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is that the horror elements are played completely straight, and it's just Abbott and Costello have wandered into one of those movies. It's so great.
I love the end because the end is Vincent Price showing up as the Invisible Man. It's like, oh dear, I'd hoped to get in on the fun. And he had played the Invisible Man. He was the Invisible Man in The Invisible Man Returns, which was the sequel to The Invisible Man with Claude Rains. The Invisible Man, I should note, is one of my absolute favorite movies and my favorite Universal monster movie.
That's right.
It's the movie that made me want to get into voiceover, because it's like Claude Rains is almost exclusively voice acting. You only see him at the very end, and he's so maniacal, and honestly, I think he has the highest body count of any Universal monster. He kills probably 150 people in that movie.
I think the first time I met you was right before Halloween, and you were going as the Invisible Man that year.
Yep, it's a cost-effective costume. You just need a hat, a coat, and a bunch of bandages, and you're good to go. And if people don't know you're the Invisible Man, they think you're Dark Man.
Dark Man.
So
you win either way, really.
Yeah, it's a win-win. And speaking of Abbott and Costello, we would be remiss not to add that you and I used to live in the building Lou Costello died in.
That's right, we did. Did we ever figure out which apartment? Was it ours?
No, I gotta imagine he had a nicer. I felt sad when I learned that because honestly, that apartment building was kind of a shithole. And
but it might not have been in the whenever
maybe
Costello died.
I felt sad because it made me worry. Oh, had he fallen on hard times? But actually, he was just renting the place while his mansion was being remodeled. So, which then made me sad because he didn't get to see if his new backsplash was nice in the kitchen. You know.
Yeah, that that apartment. Oof. That was one where we started looking into lemon laws. Isn't that what started happening?
I don't know.
You woke up with water running down your face more times in that apartment.
We woke up one morning with the light fixture in the kitchen flooded with water. We're lucky we didn't have an electrical fire.
Yeah.
Oh
God.
So much brown water in the bathtub. God damn it. It's amazing my wife stayed with me even though I was living there at the time.
Same. Oh, God.
So yeah, Will, any final thoughts on Son of Frankenstein and the sort of Universal Monster MCU, cinematic universe?
Watching this makes me want to go back and watch the others because, like I said, I hadn't seen them since I was a kid, and you talking about some of the things in Bride of Frankenstein makes me think that maybe I never saw Bride of Frankenstein.
I mean, I think they're just such fascinating little timepieces, and yeah, you can watch a bunch of them because this one's the longest one. Right. The rest of them are 70 minutes long at best.
Yeah, but I think, I was entertained by this, and I think if you are, since we are a sequel podcast looking at sequels and the history of sequels, sort of, I think it's worth tracking down sort of the Universal Monsters, because that's kind of the start of a lot of sequels in film. I mean, obviously the serials had been around for a while, but this is really like the first kind of like cinematic sequels that actually tried some sort of continuity.
And they're incredibly important pieces of horror film history.
Well, right. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like they're not scary. None of them are all that scary. And I also think this one deserves recognition because it isn't as well known. Like most people know Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, and if you've seen those or if you've seen some Universal horror and you want to see more, this is a great one.
Yeah.
It's really well done. It's beautifully shot and designed. It's one of the best looking of these movies by far. Yeah. And it's got 3 horror legends in it. So
yeah, and the matte, like you were saying, Sam, the matte paintings and the sets are just so cool. Just so cool.
Brilliant lighting too. The shadow work in these. It reminds me a lot of the black and white sort of version of some of the shadow stuff and like the fireplace stuff in Adventures of Robin Hood.
Yeah.
For sure. Also, which was, I think Michael Curtiz directed that, but that was a Warner Brothers thing that had Basil Rathbone.
Yeah.
That movie, I think, holds up today. That movie's so much fun.
Yeah.
No, this was a lot of fun. I love the Universal Monster movies, and I have great affection for them, and I love putting them on, like, in the background or on, like a lazy Sunday, because they're just great little slices of black and white cinema, and they're they go down very easy. And I'm pleased and delighted. On the opposite of pleased and delighted, it's your pick.
It is my pick. Well, hopefully this one won't be too hard. This one's a pretty recent movie that I'm just very excited because I didn't see it in theaters. It's Spider-Man: No Way Home.
All right. Wow. Can't get enough mad scientists this week, huh?
That's right. No.
I'm something of a scientist myself.
Yeah.
He said it.
He said the line. That's the equivalent of It's Alive for Spider-Man movies with Willem Dafoe, I suppose.
Yeah, I haven't seen it since I saw it in theaters, so I'll have to rewatch it. But, I mean, you might have finally gotten us over that hump, Will, into a genuinely good movie.
Yeah, well, we'll revisit this conversation after your next pick, because the one I'm going to pick is probably not going to be a winner, so...
Oh, why? Don't
It's
don't give me hope.
It's a tease, Sam.
It's like, it's the what like it's just like I'm gonna live in dread for 2 weeks.
Yeah, every time they're like, "Oh Jesus, what has Will picked this week?" Oh.
No, you know what? I'm gonna defend you. To you, I think your heart's in the right place. You're not trying to pick bad movies.
No.
But yes, Spider-Man: No Way Home, a surprise, a sneaky trilogy third movie. You wouldn't think that with a Marvel MCU movie, but it definitely is, and I think that'll be fun to talk about.
Yeah, and we can kind of we've talked around it a lot, but we can talk about the MCU. And sort of how it's barreling through culture and all sorts of things.
Absolutely, as an eminently watchable stranglehold on pop culture these days.
Yeah, probably just the same amount as the Universal Monsters did in their day.
Absolutely. Actually, I would say that if there is anything you can compare the MCU to, it is the Universal Classic Monsters. Not so much in quality, but definitely in terms of like wanting to connect all your movies and wanting to have like a constant stream of content. I think there's a lot more TLC that's going into the Marvel Studios stuff than there was into some of the lesser Universal movies. But it very much in the same spirit. This is indeed the first shared universe, I would say.
I think that's probably true. And I don't know if you have any other examples except for like either, the Godzilla movies kind of and maybe Quentin Tarantino has a kind of thing in his movies, and Kevin Smith really is the only other shared universe that I can think of.
I think some of the Hammer monsters in the 50s and 60s are all sort of connected a bit. They also were all connected because they all have Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in them.
Yeah, it's like Star Wars is all Star Wars. It's all one story, and same with Star Trek. It's all one thing. The MCU is all one thing, but all different things at the same time. I don't know.
and like the monster movies, there's like Spider-Man: No Way Home is informed by other movies besides the prior Spider-Man movies. Right. But if you only like certain heroes, you really only have to follow their threads. It's like reading Marvel comics. It's like, if you only read Captain America, you're going to only read Captain America and then the Avengers crossovers. If Chris Hemsworth is the hunk that does it for you, you watch the Thor movies. You don't have to watch the Iron Man movies. You don't have to watch Black Widow. They want you to watch everything. They want you to consume everything, but you don't have to. And it's the same with the Universal Monsters. If you only like Frankenstein, you got 7 of those. If you only like Dracula, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. 2 of them don't really have Dracula in them. It gets weird there in the middle. But yeah, that's you get it.
Yeah.
Well, folks, thank you as always for listening. You can find us on Twitter at Podcast Part 3, and please subscribe to us, give us likes, give us reviews. Reviews, apparently, this is what I've heard from the podcast gods. Reviews are kind of what get the numbers up, and I've looked at our analytics, and it's exciting to see we get more and more people downloading and listening every week, and I hope you've all been enjoying it. It's just nice to sort of sit back and chat and listen to people chatting about movies, and we hope you'll continue to join us because we have a lot of part 3s left to go. Some good ones, some okay ones, and some profoundly bad ones.
Yeah.
But until next time, Will, always a delight, always a pleasure.
Always great. Always good. I like these chats a lot. I look forward to them. So
me too. He is my friend. He does things for me.
Sounded really dirty when you just said it that way, but
I mean, it sounded dirty when Bela Lugosi
said. That's true. That's true.
He gets those dentures. He's just like grinning like a real perv through most of the movie.
I liked it when he was skulking around in the windows. Like,
yeah, the whole first act, he's just kind of skulking and like glaring at kids.
Yeah.
Karloff does not deserve to smell my shit. Good night, folks. Adios.